Hey, this is Vu, and today I wanted to go a bit in-depth on entry fragging, specifically the 3 different styles or phases of entry fragging that I think are key to actually be a more complete entry fragger and carry your team more effectively. First, I want to thank our sponsor, scleague.net. SC League is a CSGO league starting on October 22nd with registration closing on the 21st with an entry fee of €7 per player. SC League will run for 1 month with 2 matches per week, totaling 8 matches, and an additional 1 to 2 weeks for the top 32 teams that make playoffs. Those teams will also advance to the SC League Intermediate Division. SC League will have a $2,500 prize pool distributed to the top 5 teams, and the top matches in playoffs will also be streamed with casters. Feel free to register today at scleague.net. Now, with that idea in mind, we can go into the 3 different styles or phases of entry fragging, and I call them phases because you have the more early round hyper-aggressive style of entry fragging where you're really looking for fast map control, and you can do that a couple of times a half. Then we've got what I'll call the middle of the round style, or just kind of the slower paced early round style where you're still going for map control, but you're not rushing it, and the late round or execution portion of entry fragging where you're really doing true entry fragging in the most obvious sense, but it usually requires a little bit more coordination. Now, I'm going to have a few players I check over here as well as a couple of pro games, but to begin with, we've got Jack1224 who is face at 4 on Inferno, and he's going to be going for fairly quick banana control. Now, the idea behind this isn't necessarily that he needs to be getting a kill, just getting very fast banana control is going to be very effective, and you want to have these very fast plays in your repertoire, even if they're a bit inconsistent because you can't clear everything. And what Jack does with this is he goes for banana control, he gets it, then he does that peek, gets the kill there, and he transitions that into an attempted site take. Now, the whole point of the play is simply to get banana control and potentially look for that type of entry and catch an opponent off guard because of the timing. That's typically what you're looking for with these styles of play. You're looking to catch opponents on timings that they're not ready for and push them off of angles. He doesn't actually even need to be peeking in towards the site there because simply getting banana control at 135 is more than enough of an advantage for his team. Now, the reason I chose this play specifically is because of the fact that you may have noticed there were a lot of holes. They didn't molly car, they didn't molly sandbags, he didn't smoke off of half wall, which typically you need in order to deal with a molly from your opponents, and there were no flashes thrown either. This is the extreme of the inconsistency you're going to find with this type of play. However, these plays will typically be pretty inconsistent because you simply can't clear everything and you don't have the actual coordination with a pug team, even if you know the players, to throw the utility correctly. The best you're really going to be looking for in this type of thing is a molly towards sandbags, a flash near half wall from one of your teammates, and your own smoke off of half wall to deal with their molly. That's not perfect, but it is enough to make this play effective. Now, when it comes to these types of plays, there's 2 things you want to be looking for. You want to be looking for areas of contention where spawns probably do matter. So banana on Inferno is a pretty good one. And then you're looking for something that you can do with either only yourself or maybe one other teammate worth of coordination. You know, typically you can only really rely on yourself, and even then, not always, but you might often have a duo partner with you that you can use to help you set up this type of play. So I wanted to take a look at a very simple play from K23 versus Virtus Pro that you can definitely pick up yourself with a rifle or AW. So they're going to throw a decent amount of utility in the middle. It's not a ton of utility, just a fast smoke into mid and a molly connector, and James is going to go for the peek in towards A. Then he's going to hold that map control to allow Buster to go more aggressive and clear out Cat and then ladder room. This is generally how you would be using this style of entry fragging as an opper, where you get very aggressive very early and then just post up on an angle your opponents are likely to strafe into throughout the course of a round. For a rifler, you want to get a bit more aggressive than that, like Buster did, and get more forward up in towards ladder room. The thing that's important to note here is that the more map control you have, the easier it is to actually hit into a bomb site with limited or zero, if you're playing matchmaking, coordination. You know, if you have enough map control, you only need a couple of smokes and a couple of flashes that aren't necessarily perfectly coordinated to get things done. If you have very limited map control, it's going to be a whole lot harder. So the more map control you can get on your own, the easier it is to carry a very uncoordinated team. Now, opposed to the early round stuff where you're really trying to catch your opponents off guard, make them scared of these types of aggressive plays so they use utility early on the rounds you're playing more passive, and really you're trying to throw a change up without necessarily finding perfect consistency with it. When you look at these mid-round plays, the real goal is consistency. If you have a spot that's very important, like Banana on Inferno or mid on Mirage, if you can take it, 13 gun rounds in a row, you've done a fantastic job whether or not you can get a kill at all. It's really about consistently finding a way to take control, and that means taking engagements where you're clearing out one angle at a time and using your utility to actually allow that. So if we really break down this type of play on Banana, you're mollying cars so that your opponents can't have that advantageous peek when you're not really ready for it. Then you're nading and spamming corner to push an opper back, mollying sandbags so the only place they can be fighting you from is corner, and you're flashing corner so that you can get the map control, and anyone that would want to fight you corner is probably going to fall back anyway. So really you're using all of your utility to make sure that you're not taking any gunfights where your opponents aren't at some sort of a disadvantage, and if you can do that, that's optimal. If we again take this over to Mirage, a very simple way to go for map control would be to have a teammate throw a top mid smoke, because it's really one of the smokes that pretty much everyone knows. You can pretty reliably have a teammate throw that. You can head over to middle, toss a molly towards connector, flash off of middle, and this flash is just going to blind people pushing up mid. You can get out towards boxes and then smoke off window yourself, and from there you can go forward on the map trying to fight someone cat with this type of angle here. You can move your way down, and hopefully, this is the part that's a little bit tougher, you can get a teammate that can smoke top connector for you, and from that point on, you generally have a good amount of map control. Really, when it comes down to it, when you're looking for mid control on Mirage, if you can get a player into connector or ladder, you've done your job, and then you can be regrouping on the sides of the map to do something like an A hit with a ladder room lurk, or an A hit with a connector lurk, or an A hit with nobody lurking. Now, if we go into the later round execution portion of entry fragging, I think this is where a lot of people are going to have the idea that, well, I can't do this portion, but that's not entirely true. There's two styles of this, and you probably can't do the more coordinated style, which you might see a team like Big occasionally do, where they'll send in their first player, oftentimes ahead of the push with a bunch of flashes, trying to get him to catch opponents with nades out. You're most likely not ever really doing that in a pug, but you can do the standard style of entry fragging, and this is where I think people have a ton of different problems because they simply haven't played in a team to know the things you want to be doing as the first and second player in. Now, the three things I really want you to understand is that when you're actually going in on the site hit, you want to be simplifying as much as possible for pug environments. You want to be maintaining good spacing, and I'll explain that in a second, and you want to make sure you're creating space for your team. You're taking an aggressive line. Now, when I say simplifying, what I hate to see is people trying to throw perfect bomb site executes in a pug. You're simply not going to have a perfect hit when you're pugging, and it's much better to be correct on the timing than the actual execution. This is something people really understand at a higher level. You could have one less piece of utility thrown, but if you throw it at the right time and you pop in immediately afterwards, that's much better than actually even having that piece of utility but thrown poorly, or your team doesn't go in well off of it. So I actually recommend simplifying and doing something with less less utility, but making sure everyone's on the same page that they are going in off of this flash, or you just need one flash and you're going in off of it, or something like that. Now I talk about spacing here, but this is actually something that is really important throughout the round. When it comes to spacing, you want to make sure you're close enough to your teammate that you can trade frag on this player that kills him, but not so close that they spray you both down. If we actually go back to the very original clip that we started this video with, you can see the player actually got an entry on his aggressive play, but then got double killed by a player CT because the spacing was really far off. Now, of course, there are times where spacing can be a little bit further apart and still be the point, as I mentioned with the plays where your entry is trying to go in and catch them off guard, but typically you want to remain something like 3 steps apart. Now, if we look at Spirit going for arch control, you'll notice they're doing exactly that up until they get to this point close to arch. And this is something you wouldn't do in an actual execute, but you would do earlier in the round. You have the players on opposing walls covering 2 different angles. The reason you see them on opposing walls is partially so that they're not stacked on top of each other, and partially because when Sumdai Young makes contact in arch, if he dies, his teammate can instantly pivot and go for a trade because he's close to the wall. So even though you want to be further from the angle typically for a peek, in this case it allows him much more room to pivot on a trade. Once they get that kill, they then move into arch, and again they're staying a few feet apart, not on top of each other, not blocking each other's exits, but close enough that they can quickly swing and get a trade. Now, when it comes to the bomb site execute, something people learn over time, but often is not actually said, you want the first 2 players running the same path. This might seem a little bit odd at first, but the idea is the first player is just there to create space. The second player is there to trade on that player. And the most effective way to do that is to be running the same route as that player, ensuring that anyone that shoots at him, you can quickly shoot back at. Now, when I say the first player is trying to create space, you want to try and balance that a little bit if you're in a pug. You don't want to clog up the choke points where you often see on Mirage, the first player out goes to Tetris and sits there for the rest of the round. But you don't want to be YOLOing in saying, I don't care if I win the first engagement at all. You want to find a bit of a balancing point where you are creating space, you are getting into aggressive angles that threaten your opponents so they can't take engagements they want, but you also don't want to be doing it so aggressively that your team probably isn't following you, or you have almost no chance to win the actual engagements. If I was to just give a basic example of this, if we are towards B on Inferno here, you wouldn't want to necessarily stop in this area if you can help it, if your team has thrown a decent amount of utility. You want to get across this area as quickly as possible. However, once you get into pool, then you can slow it down a little bit and take a little bit more time. The reason is when you're on this side, you are clogging up the choke point and you can get rushed through from CT, you can get naded, mollied off still, all of these different things. Whereas once you've gotten to both sides, you have teammates on either side here, it's very tough for someone to push through a CT. And you have enough control that it makes it very awkward for your opponents to actually deal with you. Whereas if they know you're on the other side and you haven't crossed yet, they can just have someone new box that's very comfortably holding this sort of angle. And that's really the idea of taking space in general. And the final bit I want to include is really simple. If you are pushing through a smoke at any point, make sure your first 2 players are on opposite sides of the smoke. Don't both jump through the middle, have one go through the right and one go through the left, and that means if someone is close to it trying to spam you down, you're going to be able to trade them. Anyways, thanks for watching, I hope this helped, and I'll catch you next time.